2. 25 more reasons that suggest the controllers not only knew about the 9/11 terrorist attacks, but also allowed them to happen while failing to disclose the full story to us. 1. Colonel Don de Grand Prix, formerly employed as a top Pentagon official and author of Barbarians Inside the Gates, said in a quote from 2/11/02 edition of the American Free Press, especially revealing is a Fox 5 news tape depicting the sudden implosion of the two towers, the first of which took place at 10 a.m. The crucial segment is from 9:58 a.m. to 10:03 a.m. At 10 a.m., the screen goes blank, and a few seconds later, a great white cloud of smoke rises from the base of the tower. The news anchor exclaims, "There is an explosion at the base of the building. White smoke from the bottom. Something has happened at the base of the building." Then, another explosion. Another building in the World Trade Center complex has blown up. 2. A CNN still photo with the caption, "Breaking news, American under attack, voice of Tom Clancy, author," clearly shows a significant column of smoke rising from one of the other buildings at the World Trade Center complex, while the towers are still standing. The following information was compiled from articles written by Christopher Bolin, the staff of the American Free Press, 2/25/02, and a transcript from a talk show called Radio Free America between writer Steve Martin and a host, Tom Valentine. 4. CNN reported that on January 29, 2002, President George Bush directly requested a private meeting with Senator Majority Leader Tom Daschle and other congressmen, then requested that they limit the congressional investigation into the events of September 11. The only thing he wanted them to look into was the security breakdown as opposed to a full-scale inquiry. 5. 4 days earlier, on January 25, 2002, Tom Daschle said, "The Vice President, Dick Cheney, expressed the concern that a review of what happened on September 11th would take resources and personnel away from the effort in the war on terrorism." Tom Daschle agreed, and the scope of what occurred on 9/11 was greatly reduced. Extremely important evidence, like the WTC's steel girders, were promptly taken away to a scrapyard rather than being dispatched to a metallurgical lab and inspected. 7. Fire Engineering magazine, which has been in existence for 125 years, wrote a commentary on FEMA's handling of 9/11, saying that it, quote, "has good reason to believe that the official investigation, blessed by FEMA and run by the American Society of Civil Engineers, is a half-baked farce commandeered by political forces whose primary interests lie far afield of full disclosure," end quote. 8. An array of different factors point out that forces other than fuel fires made the towers collapse, such as the short duration and low temperature of jet fuel fires in relation to the fact that the rubble stayed on fire for more than 90 days while being doused with water on a continual basis. 9. Many of the deceased had been vaporized as opposed to being simply crushed. 10. There has been no information forthcoming from the hijacked airplane's black boxes. 11. High-tech weapons may have been involved in this attack, as was reported by an East German physicist and research scientist who was associated with the GPU's Russia version of the CIA. Quote, "I have enough experience to judge that the WTC towers have been burning too quickly, too hot, and too completely to have been caused by the kerosene jet fuel fires that result from crashes. End quote. 12. We need to re-examine one of the most glaring absurdities of this event. How could Muhammad Atta's passport drift out of the North Tower as fires raged, girders melted, dust swirled, and chaos ensued, then land pristinely atop the rubble to coincidentally be found by investigators? Even more ridiculous, if the passport was so conveniently found, why weren't the jet parts, which would be crucial to an investigation, able to emerge intact? 13. Digital surveillance photos were taken at the Portland, Maine airport that would positively identify Muhammad Atta before he caught a prop plane to Logan International in Boston. But all the public was shown were hazy video clips. Jane Eisenberg, who purportedly identified Atta, and his associate Abdul Aziz Al-Amari from FBI photographs, later reneged when asked directly if she could positively ID them. Eisenberg said she could not identify them. 15. A group of terrorists that were in no way associated with Osama bin Laden took responsibility for the attacks. Calling themselves the Japanese Red Army, they called Al Jazeera television and said they were the ones who did it. Of course, it's unlikely that they were actually responsible. But we need to ask ourselves, if our intelligence services knew nothing of these attacks, how could they come to such conclusive results almost immediately, ruling out any other alternative? In addition, why didn't the mainstream media report on this story or any other alternatives? 16. Of the 4 hijacked planes, 2 at the World Trade Center, 1 at the Pentagon, and 1 shot down near Pittsburgh, 2 were 767s capable of holding 375 people each, while the other 2 were 757s with a maximum capacity of 289 each. If you add these numbers, they would total 1,328 potential passengers. In addition, the routes they were flying that day were quite popular and more often than not were overbooked. Yet, on the day of the attacks, a Tuesday morning, there was only a total of 266 people on all 4 planes combined. That means planes that were usually overbooked and had to turn people away were only 20% full or 80% underfilled, with 1,062 empty seats. In my line of work, where I'm quite frequently at airports, I know that not only are pilots extremely cognizant of such matters, but those who run the airlines are as well. In other words, if a flight is underbooked by 80%, they either cancel it or come up with an excuse like mechanical difficulties. Think about it. Planes that hold 375 passengers and are usually overbooked now only have 75 people on it and 300 empty seats. Wouldn't that raise some eyebrows? Well, all 4 planes had the same extremely low number of passengers and were taking off within an hour of each other. The big questions are, why wasn't anyone on these flights? Why isn't the media reporting this aspect of the story? And why weren't the flights grounded? Maybe it's because with less people on each plane, the terrorists would have fewer outraged passengers to ward off after they hijacked it. 17. The CIA, according to a Washington Post report on December 23, 2001, financed a group of Afghanis to track Osama bin Laden for 4 years. Then, mysteriously, just before or after September 11th, the team members lost track of bin Laden. The CIA CIA has no problem following bin Laden for 4 years, then right before he's ready to strike, he vanishes. Worse, following attacks, they can't find him either. Here's a 6'4" guy with a big turban, an ugly beard, and a bedsheet for clothes, but he can't be found. Go out and rack up a few parking tickets and see how long you can remain anonymous without getting caught. 18. Newsweek ran a story on September 24, 2001, stating that on September 10, 2001, a group of Pentagon officials unexpectedly canceled their flights due to security concerns. Since certain segments of our military and intelligence communities knew, why didn't they tell the rest of us? Over 3,000 lives could have been spared. 19. A German public television station, ARD, ran a report on November 23, 2001, which said the FBI traced mastermind Mohammed Atta's whereabouts for quite some time during 2000, when he bought explosives and journeyed between Frankfurt and Hamburg, Germany. 20. A direct quote from the BBC on Mohammed Atta. Quote, "The evidence reinforces concerns that the international intelligence community may have known more about Atta before September 11 than was previously thought, but it failed to act." Atta came to the attention of U.S. authorities in the course of several occasions in 2001. In January, he was allowed to re-enter the United States after a trip to Germany, despite the fact that he was in violation of his visa status. He landed in Miami on a flight from Geneva on January 10 on a tourist visa, although he told immigrant inspectors that he was taking flying lessons in the U.S., for which an M1 student visa is required. 21. According to Dean Butterfield, who works for the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the Washington Post reported that 9 times out of 10, anyone without the proper immigration papers would not be granted entry into the United States, especially if they had been under FBI surveillance. 22. A big question. Why didn't the Air Force dispatch planes to alleviate this disaster when it was clear that the planes had been hijacked and weren't flying according to flight schedules? Steve Martin refers to a summation of this situation that appeared on Rense.com. Dozens of Air Force and Air National Guard bases are within 10 to 30 minutes intercept time of both the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. Most of these installations have fighter jets such as F-16s ready on a moment's notice to intercept troubled aircraft. It is a fact that air defense units did receive notice from air traffic controllers and Federal Aviation Administration officials that a number of aircraft on the East Coast had broken communications and had deviated radically on the morning of September 11. It is a fact that standard intercept procedures for dealing with these kinds of situations are in force 365 days a year. 23. The New York Daily News reported that at 9:06 a.m. on the morning of 9/11, the New York Police Department dispatched a message declaring, "This was a terrorist attack. Notify the Pentagon." 24. Almost 60 minutes after 2 airliners crashed into the World Trade Centers, another terrorist plane zoomed into the Pentagon. At Andrews Air Force Base, only 10 miles from the White House, military planes sat idling on the runway, despite the fact that they had reports from air traffic controllers, news broadcasts, and the New York City Police Department. Yet they still didn't do anything but sit there while another plane lambasted the Pentagon. What was going on? 25. Newsday, located in New York City, reported that a Pentagon spokesman by the name of Vic Wierzinski, an Air Force lieutenant colonel, stated, "The Pentagon was simply not aware that this aircraft was coming our way." This example seemed to be another conflicting statement. For the London Sunday Telegraph reported on September 14, 2001, quote, "Within minutes of the attack, American forces around the world were put on one of their highest states of alert, DEFCON 3, just 2 notches short of all-out war," end quote. Again, why didn't our armed forces protect us on 9/11? We spent over $300 billion a year on the military. For what? To have the controllers hold them back while terrorists kill our people? The San Diego Tribune reported a day after the attacks, "Air defense around Washington is provided mainly by fighter planes from Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland near the District of Columbia border. The D.C. Air National Guard is also based there and equipped with F-16 fighter planes. But the fighters took to the skies over Washington only after the devastating attack on our Pentagon." This view is corroborated by NBC News, which reported on 9/11. It was after the attack on the Pentagon that the Air Force then decided to scramble F-16s out of the D.C. National Guard, Andrews Air Force Base, to fly protective cover over Washington. Well, hey, thanks for the protective cover. With friends like you, who needs enemies? The total number of reasons I've come up with that suggest the controllers knew about the 9/11 attacks and didn't do anything to stop them is 65. 65 reasons. Listen, can you hear me? Watch the videos of 9/11 again and relive the horrors. Then let these 65 reasons burrow into your brain. Do you get it? The controllers knew about it. They knew, and not only didn't they stop the attacks, they wanted them to happen to further promote their war machine Big Brother agenda. How does this settle with you? Does it sicken you? And more importantly, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to roll over and play dead, or are we going to make them pay? It's time for action. Military smokescreen. Who commanded our Air Force to stand down? Of all the peculiarities, unanswered questions, and things that simply don't add up about the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the one aspect that keeps nagging at me revolves around our military's incredible lack of response to the hijacking of 4 airliners. Anyone who investigates this matter will soon find that the United States Air Force and the FAA both have established procedures that have been in place for at least 25 years regarding planes that veer abnormally off course. Specifically, federal law mandates that the Air Force must dispatch a plane to investigate why a certain craft has strayed from its predestined route. These interceptors are only allowed to shoot an airliner from the sky under orders from the president, but that doesn't negate that they are still required to investigate the situation in a timely manner. Yet on 9/11, no one followed orders. Why? Who gave these orders? Plus, Washington, D.C. has the most restricted airspace in the country. Yet from 9:03 a.m. when the second tower was hit to 9:47 a.m. when the Pentagon came under attack, when the Air Force knew that a jet was headed toward the Capitol, no planes were dispatched to intercept it. Who gave the orders for these planes to stand down? And God forbid, were some even called back after they had taken off? To begin understanding how appalling this situation is, we first need to know that there are at least 12 National Guard and Air Force installations in close proximity to the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Plus, Andrews Air Force Base is only 10 miles from the heart of Washington, D.C. Why wasn't something done to avert this catastrophe? And why isn't the mainstream media asking some very hard questions regarding this deliberately ordered crime? Yes, I said crime. And once you get a load of the following timeline, you'll concur with this strong terminology. Between 7:59 a.m. to 8:10 a.m., the airliners that would ultimately crash into the WTC and Pentagon were hijacked. By 8:15 a.m., air traffic controllers knew that these planes were in trouble. At this point, the Air Force should have dispatched, per standard operating procedures, fighters that would determine why these jets veered from their normal route. By 8:15 a.m., at 8:45 a.m., a half hour later, American Airlines Flight 11 struck the WTC's North Tower. This flight took off at exactly 7:59 a.m. Thus, controllers knew it was in trouble for at least 35 minutes, if not more. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower. It took off at exactly 8:10 a.m. At 9:05, supposedly, Andrew Card told President Bush of the unfolding catastrophe. At the same time, American Airlines Flight 77 veered off course near Chicago and headed toward D.C. for an impending attack. At 9:06 a.m., the New York Daily News reported that on the morning of the attack, the NYPD dispatched a message declaring, "This was a terrorist attack. Notify the Pentagon." Still, no Air Force jets had been scrambled. None. Why? At 9:35 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, which had been tracked by radar all the way from Chicago, circled the Pentagon. Yet, this military installation was not evacuated. Plus, the Air Force still had not sent out any jets. How completely incredible is this scenario? A few minutes later, with the utmost precision, American Airline Flight 77 dropped 7,000 feet in 2.5 minutes. Do you realize what a truly difficult maneuver this is? It is flying so low at this point that the plane is taking out utility poles and clipping trees en route to its target. The jumbo jet finally zeroes in exactly on the Pentagon while traveling at 460 knots, approximately 529 miles per hour. Are we really to believe that this precision, Top Gun-style flying was executed by a group of desert-trained Afghanis who had only flown Cessna and Piper prop planes at a flight school in Florida for 6 months? Many of them reportedly unable to even take off or land them adequately? Come on. This is the most inept cock and bull story since the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Finally, at 9:40 a.m., a full hour and 31 minutes after the FAA knew that the first airliner had been hijacked, guess what happened? The Air Force dispatched their jets. The Pentagon was aware of these hijackings since at least 8:45 a.m. when the first tower was struck, and more likely before then. Yet it took them 55 minutes to take action. 55 minutes. By 8:15 a.m., when the FAA learned of the hijackings, federal law required that the military dispatch planes to either divert the plane's course or determine the need to shoot them down. This is normal procedure. But the Pentagon waited until 9:40 a.m. after all the damage was already done. Who commanded the Air Force to stand down, and why is the media still feeding us the incompetence line? The Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk could have had a plane up in the air in that much time. Barry Zwicker, a Canadian media analyst, wrote on January 21, 2002, "That morning, no interceptors responded in a timely fashion to the highest alert situation. That includes the Andrews Squadron that is 12 miles from the White House." Whatever the explanation for the huge failure, there have been no reports, to my knowledge, of reprimands. This further weakens the incompetence theory. To add more weight to the peculiarity of this situation, consider the flight capacity of the 4 hijacked airliners. These routes were extremely popular ones, most of them filled to 100% capacity during weekdays. In fact, oftentimes flyers were asked if they wanted to give up their seats to another traveler. Yet on 9/11, the 4 flights in question were uncharacteristically empty. American Airlines 11 filled only to 39% of capacity. American Airlines 77 filled to only 27% of capacity. United Airlines 175 filled to only 26% capacity. United Airlines 93 filled to only 16% of capacity. In an industry that pays extremely close attention to such matters, why didn't anyone see the red flags that were being waved? Did someone tell them to neglect these glaring inconsistencies to lessen the collateral damage or the insurance payouts? Since I mentioned United Airlines Flight 93, consider this odd bit of information. The Reuters news agency reported on 9/13/2001 an article entitled "Troubling Questions in Troubling Times." Pennsylvania state officials said on Thursday debris from the plane had been found up to 8 miles away from the crash site. Do you realize how immense an 8-mile stretch of land is? Do you also realize that when a plane drops from the sky, the impact does not cause the wreckage to scatter for 8 miles? Think about it. 8 miles is the length of 140 football fields laid end to end. Obviously, something else happened to bring Flight 93 out of the sky. Strong evidence points to the Air Force shooting it down. Then the plane disintegrated during its 8-mile descent into a rural Pennsylvania field. Yet the powers that be lied once again to the American people. Now do you know why President Bush personally asked Tom Daschle to limit their congressional inquiry? Another aspect of this case that makes me scratch my head is this. Why won't the FAA release the entire records of the pilot conversations with their air traffic controllers? Another pertinent question revolves around the pilots' curious reactions during these hijackings. Once they got the first inkling that they were being overtaken, why didn't they simply perform a rollover to incapacitate or disable the hijackers? The barrel roll is an easily performed procedure for veteran pilots, especially when one considers the backgrounds of the 4 men who manned these flights. As Colonel Don de Grand Prix reports, John Oganowski, Vietnam Air Force fighter pilot; Leroy Homer, former Air Force pilot; Victor Saracini, former fighter pilot; Chick Burlingame, Naval Academy graduate who flew F-4s in Vietnam. All of these pilots were described as being strong, agile, healthy, in excellent physical condition, and certainly capable of performing a simple rollover. Now, I'm not blaming these men by any means. It just seems like if given the opportunity, these pilots would have disoriented the hijackers enough to gain control of the situation and avert disaster. Rather, we're being led to believe that these 3 jumbo jets were flown into buildings by Middle Eastern hijackers brandishing nothing more than box cutters, and all of them had only 6 months flying experience. I don't know about you, but if everything were on the up and up, I'd put my faith in these pilots being able to nullify the hijackers any day of the week. But again, we're not being given the entire story because something doesn't add up. I could continue with dozens of other inconsistencies, but instead I will close on this note. Who in the mainstream media is asking these and other pertinent questions? No one. Who in the Pentagon is answering these questions? No one. Finally, who in the Pentagon has been made accountable for the Air Force stand down? Again, no one. Do you think it's time our government and the media started addressing these issues? I do. Notes and quotes. The War on Terrorism. Money, Fear, and Rights. War equals profits. It's that simple. Here's how the equation works. Banks lend money to countries to fight their battles, then extend further loans after the war is over to help rebuild the nation that was defeated. By utilizing this strategy, the banks always win because the victor is deeply indebted to them via loans, while the loser is controlled through the extended political influence associated with their indebtedness. Those in the know also make a killing during the war by manipulating the stock market, utilizing inside information, and knowing the markets will be volatile. They short sell while the stocks are high, making a huge profit, then wait for the market to drop, as it inevitably does, and rebuy at rock bottom prices, knowing full well they'll rise again after everything settles down, thus more financial gains. War is hell for some and big bucks for others. Which category do you think the controllers fit into? 3 days after the World Trade Center attack, Congress approved a $40 billion spending bill, with half of the money being used on increased military spending. Congress has also earmarked $15 billion to bail out the airline industry and $100 million for the New York City cleanup. Here's another thing to think about. Collectively, the World Trade Center generated $74 million a year in taxes that went to New York Center City. That revenue has now been eliminated. The Federal Reserve is also getting in on the game, pumping out over $100 billion in new loans. The insurance companies are taking a royal bath during this catastrophe. What point am I trying to make? I'm not taking a judgmental stance by saying these expenditures are good or bad. All I'm trying to point out is that an enormous amount of money is currently being spent, and at some point we're going to have to pony up for it. When we do, who's going to make the brunt of these payments and take it on the chin, us or the controllers? Whose pocket do you think the money is going to come out of? Those who control most of the money, the controllers, or those who have little, ours? It's something to consider. Government does not control the Federal Reserve. It is a privately owned company. 5 banks account for almost 60% of the Federal Reserve's ownership. Think about it. 5 banks literally rule the world. Also, when we make payments on our national debt, the interest payments alone equal $359 billion a year. Who does that money go to? Answer: the international bankers. Who do the international bankers answer to? No one except the utmost tier of the power pyramid, the controllers themselves. Despite the capitalist credo of competition, the multinational companies that comprise the New World Order despise competition. John D. Rockefeller said it best: competition is a sin. They love monopolies. Why doesn't the media point out any of these disturbing facts to us? Isn't it their job to be society's watchdog? The reason they don't is because ABC is beholden to Texaco, NBC is affiliated with British Petroleum, and Time Warner is associated with Mobil. Remember, the 4 largest industries in the world are 1. Usury, 2. Energy, 3. Drugs, and 4. War. When the oil industry barks orders, the media falls in line. Instead of being this country's watchdog, the corporate media is nothing more than a pacified lapdog. Network USA stated the biggest threat to Americans' freedom is not going to come from terrorists. It is going to come from politicians guided by the manipulated fears of the public. If you look back over the last 60 years, the theater of terror has played a prominent role in putting this country in its current predicament. What do I mean by the theater of terror? It is a single act that is so dramatic and terrifying, it leaves a permanent mark or indentation on the collective national psyche. The most striking examples of this phenomenon would be Pearl Harbor, the atomic bombs of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK's assassination, the Manson murders, the Challenger explosion, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the World Trade Center terrorist attacks. Other countries, for example, Australia with its Port Arthur massacre, have also experienced these traumas. Theater of terror, so intense and foreign to what we're accustomed to. At first glance, almost seems like a Hollywood production, except it's real. The fear factor paralyzes us, temporarily curbing progress. Imagine what would happen if someone had the ability to manipulate this theater of terror to their own advantage. On a small scale, how many children have been severely impaired in their development due to a parent or institution's use of terror? The results are all around us. Now, think of this phenomenon on a larger scale. How can a world-shattering event be used to manipulate people in a certain direction? A perfect example is Hitler's invasion of Europe. After the atrocities of World War I, America wanted nothing to do with another monumental war. The controllers were aware of our collective aversion to entering another protracted battle, so they needed a catastrophic event to motivate us, thus Pearl Harbor. Do you see how it works? Manipulate the theater of terror to derive a desired outcome. If we examine this concept in regard to trauma-based mind control, we'd realize the more fearful a person becomes, the more susceptible they are to control. How easy is it to control a lion out on the range? Extremely difficult. Yet if this lion is caged and turned into a cowering shell of its former self, how easy would it be to control? Here's the formula. Trauma equals susceptibility equals manipulation. Ever since 9/11, think about how much fear has been laid upon us. We're afraid of certain types of people, white powder anthrax, the mail, airplanes, smallpox, etc. Through fear and insecurity, the controllers are destroying our confidence, chipping away at the invincibility of our country and eroding the belief in ourselves. What if this reign on terror continues and we begin to see the loss of our national sovereignty, a military defeat, and a full-scale economic collapse? Then, how would deliberately induced fear relate to our confidence? Controlled chaos is one of the oldest fear-inducing tactics the controllers have used throughout the years. If this situation is viewed in terms of Hegelian dialectics, you can see how controlled conflict is used to weaken a citizenry. Thesis, freedom. Antithesis, real or simulated threats. Predetermined thesis, the loss of our rights. I started thinking about how much fear currently exists in this country, and it struck me that it's the first time people my age have had to live under this cloak of paranoia. I wasn't even alive when the atrocities of World War II befell us, or while children were told to hide under their school desks during the 1950s, a byproduct of the Cold War. Nor was I forced to endure the Cuban Missile Crisis or the Vietnam War draft. In this sense, my generation has never had to live under an umbrella of fear. And even though I'm not personally afraid of what the controllers are doing because I understand their tactics, I see the seeds being planted for a new type of society. Increased intelligence operations, the National Guard at airports carrying M16s, and chemical and biological attacks. What it all boils down to is that the controllers go to great lengths to prevent actual real threats to society, but they have no problem creating situations that inspire fear in people so they can be more easily manipulated to toe the line. The loss of rights, notes and quotes. Associated Press article by Jesse J. Holland, October 24, 2001. Police would be able to conduct secret searches of suspects' homes, tap all their cell and home phones, and track their use of the internet under anti-terrorism legislation moving toward final approval in the House. Justice Ralph Forbes, Arkansas congressional candidate. In 1984, there is a chilling passage where the interrogator is describing the future to the character Winston Smith, and he says, "Imagine the heel of a boot grinding in a human face throughout all eternity." That's our view of the future. William Safire, in an article for the New York Times on November 14, 2002, entitled, "You Are a Suspect." If the Homeland Security Act is not amended before passage, here is what will happen to you. Every purchase you make with a credit card, every magazine subscription you buy and medical prescription you fill, every website you visit, an email you send or receive, every academic grade you receive, every bank deposit you make, every trip you book, and every event you attend. All these transactions and communications will go into what the Defense Department describes as a virtual centralized grand database. To this computerized dossier on your private file from commercial sources, add every piece of information that the government has about you: passport application, driver's license and bridge toll records, judicial and divorce records, complaints from nosy neighbors to the FBI, your lifetime paper trail, plus the latest hidden camera surveillance. And you have the Super Snoop stream, a total information awareness about every U.S. citizen. Homeland Security Force equals Big Brother. How about the use of technology to diminish our rights and bolster surveillance? Video cameras are now being installed all over America on every downtown street corner in the guise of catching red light runners. How do you feel about instant DNA tests if you're pulled over for a routine traffic violation? What would happen if satellites were able to actually shut off your automobile if it was producing too much pollution? What if you were forced to carry a national ID card that had your fingerprints on it? To better monitor what you're looking at on the internet, what if you had to undergo a retinal scan prior to logging on? Do you know that right now the FBI has a file on every U.S. citizen, even those who have never broken a law or been arrested? Did you know that when you walk through an airport, the authorities have equipment that can tell exactly how much money you're carrying via the metallic strips embedded inside the bills? And if you have over $1,000 in cash, they're allowed to stop and search you. This is part of the increased search, seizure, detention, and wiretapping laws that are currently being passed with alarming speed. Technology exists right now where a CCTV camera can zoom in on you at a stadium filled with people, transfer the information to a computer with face recognition programs, and identify you as someone who's a threat. What if Congress passes a bill stating every person in the United States must submit to mandatory fingerprinting? To ensure that everyone adheres to this policy, what if they create fingerprint scanners at every checkout counter, and the only way you'll be able to buy something is if it scans your fingerprint ID card? Here's the deal with national ID cards that certain members of the media are trying to push on us. At some point, a national ID card will be issued, but only as a stepping stone to bigger and badder things. Why? Because this card is going to be created to deliberately fail. Yes, because of its propensity to be counterfeited, which will be built into the card in the first place, will then be seduced into accepting an actual implant. What will these implants entail? Basically, they'll be set into your palm, be powered by lithium batteries, and they'll carry at least 400,000 bytes of information. They will let the watchers know your family relationships, criminal background, travel activities, health information, purchasing and financial history, what you read, what you look at on the internet, and a slew of other data. They will be updated on a daily basis every time you go to the store, log onto your computer, go to the doctor, withdraw money, etc. Sounds like the perfect vehicle for Big Brother, huh? The controllers are already experimenting with these implants in actual human beings as we speak. The New World Order isn't something that's coming in the future. It's already here. The other day, after listening to me deliver all this information, a woman asked, "So what if they do all that stuff? They can look in my bank account or where I've been on the computer. I'm not a terrorist. I don't have anything to hide." I told her that by only looking at the small picture, she's right. She's not a terrorist. But what if Big Brother says Victor Thorn is a dangerous character? He's a threat, and he's letting the cat out of the bag. So what we're going to start doing is targeting everyone who reads Babel magazine or the writings of Victor Thorn. Guess what, folks? Big Brother just put you on his list. Now, do you care? 5. 9/11 smokescreen. How could there be a conspiracy of silence in regard to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, some people may ask. Look at the news every day with endless reports about what President Bush did or didn't know. The mainstream media is really on this story. There's no denying it. They'll get to the bottom of it. On the surface, most people would be satisfied with this analysis. The 9/11 foreknowledge story is on the cover of Newsweek and the Washington Post, while Rush Limbaugh and the CBS Evening News give updates daily. Also, the media is supposedly sniffing out new clues and looking at every angle. Ignored FBI reports, terrorist visas, flight schools, who knew what in the Bush cabinet, and the lack of shared knowledge between the various intelligence agencies. The Sunday morning pundits argue endlessly about it, and Dick Cheney makes his rounds while congressmen grandstand and rattle off sound bites. With all this information coming our way, the mainstream media must be giving us the whole story, right? I hate to break it to you, but if you rely solely on all of the above sources for your information, no, you are not getting the whole story. Why? The answer lies in the scope of what is being presented to you. Stated differently, the media is continuing a long-standing practice of conditioning the masses by only giving them half truth and half the picture. More specifically, through the use of psychic driving, a certain message repeated over and over again, they constantly refer to George Bush or any other president as the head of the decision-making process in this country, with no one above or beyond them. Nothing could be further from the truth. Here's why. I hear plenty of well-intentioned people talking about what's wrong with America. Some even provide ways to make things better. But first, we must make one fundamental change. It's imperative that we alter the way we view the world's control system. Let me clarify. If Americans don't break free of the multifaceted conditioning that begins as soon as we make contact with the external world, school, news, prevailing myths, etc., then nothing will ever improve. Nothing. Most of us have believed from an early age that the President of the United States is the commander-in-chief, and he has the ultimate authority to lead our country. This notion is continually reinforced by our public education indoctrination system, the media, and a type of cultural mythology. This is an illusion. Hidden powers, specifically international bankers, heads of multinational corporations, secret societies, and elite families actually call all the shots. By controlling the world's purse strings through the Federal Reserve, World Bank, IMF, and socialistic taxation, these veiled figures lurk in the shadows, out of public view, yet determine virtually every vital decision made in our world. This concept is the key to understanding not only our political system, it is also the first step necessary for changing our destiny. As things stand now in relation to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, every major media source has reinforced the lie that George Bush is at the top of the American decision-making pyramid. Before we continue, let's examine what happened on 9/11 and what we know for sure. First, the World Trade Center towers in New York City were destroyed, while the Pentagon was also severely damaged in a similar fashion. Second, the airliners that caused this destruction were hijacked, although we can't be certain by whom, as FBI Director Robert Mueller admitted in a speech to the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco on April 19, 2002. Quote, "In our investigation, we have not uncovered a single piece of paper, either here in the United States or in the treasure trove of information that has turned up in Afghanistan and elsewhere, that mentioned any suspect of the September 11 plot." Third, there is a preponderance of evidence pointing out that numerous individuals knew exactly when, how, and where these attacks were going to take place. With the above information laying a foundation, we have to next make a few well-conceived assumptions. First of all, America spends billions of dollars on intelligence, and it's not stepping too far out on a ledge to say that, considering the advanced nature of our computer systems, black budget technology, tracking devices, and infiltration of foreign governments, we have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the world. The second assumption, well-founded in documented fact, is that certain groups on this planet have an immense hatred of America. Let's assume one of those is the Osama bin Laden Al-Qaeda Taliban connection. Without delving into the mountains of evidence that has been compiled since 9/11, suggesting that scores of people in a variety of different walks of life had foreknowledge of these attacks, and considering how our intelligence agencies pride themselves on being aware of this data, we need to start drawing some conclusions. The men who rule this planet are able to protect their positions of power for one important reason. They have an obsessive hunger or demand for knowledge and information. In other words, when one studies the world control pyramid, they'll notice that directly below the ultimate controllers are the intelligence agencies. Secret, beyond the law, and largely unaccountable to Congress or anyone else, these agencies are an integral part of the very framework that allows the controllers to survive. To perpetuate themselves, the ultra-elite are heavily dependent upon their spies and spooks to keep them abreast of what's going on in this complicated world. Without these aids, their house of cards would crumble. Considering how vital information gathering is, and in light of the volumes of evidence that a variety of people had at least an inkling of foreknowledge that an attack was going to occur on September 11, and that's just what we know, I assure you the NSA and CIA know much more than we do. Thus, I propose this question. Why are the media and Congress so fixated on whether George Bush knew about the attacks beforehand? The answers may surprise you. First of all, considering how divisive the 2000 presidential election was, there are still huge chasms in the American populace between the Bush lovers and Bush haters. Thus, if the media can further exploit this rift, then the controllers can yet again use their favorite tactic, divide and conquer. By keeping everyone fighting among themselves, we won't focus our attention on who the real enemy is. Can't you see? It's the oldest trick in the book. By directing our attention away from the source of this conflict, we'll never get to the bottom of it. The controllers are masters of this Wizard of Oz type of misdirection. There's nobody behind the curtain. They'd rather we worry about symptoms and not the real cause. But there's more to the story. Every entity I mentioned in the first paragraph, network news, influential daily papers, Congress, national magazines, and syndicated talk show hosts, refuse to recognize or acknowledge that the hidden power elite controllers even exist. To them, and this point is crucial, the American president, currently George Bush, is at the head of the decision-making process. The buck stops with him, and that's it. But as we know, nothing could be more ludicrous. In fact, Bush, Clinton, Reagan, Carter, etc. were and are nothing more than implementers. Decisions are made for them, which they implement. The same can be said for Congress. This is the reality of our worldwide political system. So what does it really matter if George Bush had foreknowledge of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, except for ethical reasons, of course? By the time anyone has risen to that level, ethics have almost entirely been thrown away anyway. Can you see where I'm coming from? Let's cut through all the rhetoric and lay it on the line. George Bush, Bill Clinton, and Tom Daschle don't make decisions. They carry them out for others who prefer to remain hidden. Thus, the important question we should be asking, considering the wealth of evidence, is who did have foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks? I'll answer this question by asking a few more questions. 1. Who was in a better position than anyone to gain access to not only United States intelligence, but also intelligence information from around the world, especially the Mossad? Answer: the controllers. 2. Who had the resources to obtain this information? Via surveillance, carnivore, email spying, wiretaps, undercover spies, and a wealth of other cloak and dagger techniques. Answer: the controllers. Who, more than anyone else, could have known about a sect of America haters who wanted to enact a form of revenge on us? Answer: the controllers. 4. Who needed a dramatic excuse similar to sinking the Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, or the Gulf of Tonkin to draw America into another war so they could extract oil and resume opium exportation from Afghanistan, punish those who didn't fall in line with their New World Order goals, and set into action a Big Brother dismissal of our civil rights? Answer: the controllers. 5. Who was most able to enact a cover-up in the media, the same media that they own? Answer: the controllers. 6. Finally, who needed to know this information more than anyone else, And who benefited from it more than anyone else? The victims? No, they're all dead. The American people? No. War is going to plunge us so much further into debt, we'll never crawl back out. The country of Afghanistan? No, they're getting bombed to smithereens. The terrorists themselves? No, they're all dead. How about the controllers? Yes. Yes, they knew, but all the while, what is everyone obsessing over? Whether George Bush knew? Well, maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. But personally, if for nothing other than ethical reasons, it doesn't really impact our situation because he's not calling the shots. Bush, similar to his predecessors, is a figurehead, furniture, window dressing. I want to know the names of those people who really make the decisions and intentionally allowed this disaster to occur. There is no longer any question that powerful people had foreknowledge of the terrorist attacks. Look at the stock market irregularities, the Fortune 500 CEOs being whisked away before tragedy struck, or the military and political figures being told not to board planes that fateful morning. The controllers allowed a group of dirtballs to hijack our airliners and crash them into the WTC, killing nearly 3,000 people. Can't you see what happened? They invaded America, traumatized us horribly, and to top it off, they're getting away with it by having their state-run media fiddle around with whether George Bush knew or not. But the picture is so much bigger and more serious. We're setting the stage for World War III, and the 9/11 crime was step one. But Dan Rather continues to snow us, as do the New York Times and Newsweek. Here is the way the news should be reported. Dan Rather. Today, the Rothschild banking family decided that steps will be taken to implement a UN-sanctioned world tax. Here's John Roberts with the details. John Roberts. That's right, Dan. Upon orders from N.M. Rothschild in London, David Rockefeller telephoned President Bush and let him know that at some point next year he'll agree to start a smokescreen in unison with Congress to vote in favor of the UN world tax. Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger also entered the picture, with Kissinger writing your script for you, Dan, while Brzezinski briefed Bush on everything. He would tell the American people at his next State of the Union address. Back to you, Dan. Dan Rather. In other news, Frankfurt's Warburg financial family sent an edict to Americans' Alan Greenspan, director of the privately owned monopolistic Federal Reserve Corporation, telling him to raise the prime lending rate, thus creating billions of dollars in profits for all the leading stockholders. Instead, we still keep getting the same old tried and true psychic driving conditioning. The controllers, those with no ties or allegiance to any nation, are getting ready to start having people killed again on a large scale in their next war. It's death time in the theater of destruction. The same people who allowed the WTC to be destroyed are the ones calling the shots to send our boys into battle. American lives and American blood are going to be sacrificed at the altar of the greedy, evil, globalistic money interest. Every major war and revolution of the 20th century did not originate from the people. They were planned, orchestrated, financed, and dictated from the top of the control pyramid. As Black Sabbath sang many years ago, quote, generals gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. It's that simple. The evildoers are plotting to eliminate more American lives and those from other countries too. What is it going to take to propel us into action? Why don't we force the controllers out of the shadows? Rather than letting them call the shots like rats under the cloak of darkness, let's shine a light on them and expose their motives. Then we'll actually see what's going on instead of being bamboozled by this ludicrous media game they keep playing on us. Folks, before we can change our circumstances, we need to change the way we view the world. Our lifetime of conditioning needs to be erased, then replaced with a worldview that is more accurate. We can no longer tolerate media deceit. Instead, we need to make everyone aware of who really calls the shots and run them out of their elitist towers of control. If we don't, then get ready, because the blood is going to start flowing in rivers across the land. Do we have the guts to stand up to these greedy monsters, or are we going to allow them to roll over us and kill our sons? We'd better act now before it's too late, and God forbid if that time arrives. Fear, psychic driving, and Pavlov's dogs. Terrorist hijackers steer their planes into the World Trade Centers on a sunny Tuesday morning. Flames, smoke, people leaping 9 stories to their death, screaming, sirens, pandemonium. Then the towers come crashing to the ground in Battery Park. And oh yeah, television cameras, many, many television cameras. Then the major networks and news channels rebroadcasting the horrifying event over and over again. Every scene, every angle, every snippet of the jets, flames, impact, and both towers falling to the earth. Over and over, over and over, the hijacked jet, the towers, the moment that forever changed American life. September 11th, 2001, TV, 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 bleary eyes fixated on CNN, Fox, CBS, NBC, and ABC. Television, TV, video images drawing viewers to it like a morbid magnet. Shortly thereafter, anthrax scares send the country reeling with more panic. Don't open your mail, white powder, respiratory damage, biological terrorism, senators evacuated, postmen falling dead, and every day on the radio, on TV and newspapers and magazines, more hysteria, more coverage, more fear. During the same time, air travelers are filled with anxiety. Everyone suspected of being a terrorist, long waiting lines, the National Guard holding M16s, evacuations, more long lines, inspections, x-rays, no toenail clippers, bomb threats, and rumors of more terrorists lurking behind every pillar. Now we have pipe bombs in mailboxes, the new weekly computer virus that makes us tremble with fear over emails and attachments, plus color-coded terror alerts and reports about banks, malls, and train stations being targeted for destruction. And all the while, there's CNN, the New York Times, and Newsweek continuing their psychic driving hour after hour, day after day. Psychic driving? What's that? Psychic driving is the repeated exposure to a specific message over and over and over again. A continued systematic replay of the same theme until the subject is thoroughly indoctrinated into accepting a certain belief. In this day and age, it's fear, pure, oozing, strip away the veneer, total fear. The heartland trembles and leaves their mailboxes open. Tomorrow it might be Floridians and psychotic drive-by bazooka shootings perpetrated by, you guessed it, faceless, nameless terrorists who can't be seen or heard or located. But I'm telling you, folks, the whole thing is a ruse. Sure, a few people had their mailboxes blown up by a mind-controlled punk rock zombie, and a few citizens died from anthrax. Not high-ranking public officials, if you noticed. But in all, those who are setting this entire theater of fear into motion are the real terrorists, the international controller cabal that's ready to raise another level on their pyramid of power. A few events in the recent past set the stage for this onslaught. Waco, the first WTC bombing, and the government set up at Oklahoma City, where explosives inside the Murrah building did more damage than little old mind-controlled Timothy McVeigh. Of course, when you sprinkle in some remote-controlled high school shooters, especially at Columbine, the stage is set to seize control. And that happened on September 11, 2001, with the World Trade Center terrorist attacks. You see, the controllers usually do things in small steps, patiently boiling us like frogs in a pot. But every once in a while, they need to kick it up a notch, a la the WTC attacks. That way, similar to the Charles Manson murders, a huge, indelible emotional scar is permanently embedded on the human psyche. These are the events that rip us to shreds, give our children nightmares, and leave most of us trembling in the relative safety of our homes. In September 2001, this country was essentially chopped off at the knees. We reeled day in and day out from the psychological impact. I know one lady who sat in front of her TV for 18 hours a day and became such a debilitated wreck. She said even her dog got sick from all the terror-filled vibes she was emitting. But don't get fooled into thinking it's over. Just last week, we received an email from a woman giving us first-hand chemtrail accounts. When we asked her if we could reprint her emails anonymously in Babylon magazine, she instantly shrieked and retreated with fear. God forbid someone from the big bad government might find out who sent us this information. Our society is being crippled by a faceless, nameless form of fear that is being crammed down our throats by every media source available. Radio talk show hosts, television images, newspaper editorials, and op-ed letters, gory magazine photographs, plus internet rumors and half-truths are all contributing to this fear. And America is falling prey to it. Where did our fighting spirit go? With overwhelming evidence that the controllers not only knew about the 9/11 attacks, but allowed them to happen, with this evidence now openly reported in the mainstream press, why aren't we gathering in the streets to bring these monsters to their knees? These same controllers are setting America up for a great fall, only to replace us with China as the next world superpower. But we sit idly by without taking action. Why? We are numb with fear. The entire planet is kept in its proper place because of fear. Religions use it, as do governments, police, parents, social groups, schools, and faceless bureaucratic institutions such as the IRS. Soon this fear will be all-encompassing in the image of Big Brother, just as George Orwell predicted in his novel 1984. The saddest part is we know how the controllers use fear, yet we still allow them to manipulate us. It's similar to a scrawny 150-pound lion tamer keeping 10 Bengal tigers at bay inside a cage at the circus. Not only that, but he also has them perform emasculating tricks, jump through hoops, and bow to him, simply because he cracks his whip. These gorgeous, regal, powerful animals are completely slavish to his desires, demeaned to the point that it fills me with rage. But then again, are we any different? Think of how great humanity could be and how much potential we possess. But we allow the controllers to rule us. It wouldn't be so bad if they made our world idyllic and utopian. But they don't. Look around. We have wars and upcoming wars everywhere. Starvation on a massive scale. Homelessness, and a man-made AIDS virus running rampant in Africa and the Orient. These people are adults, but they sure don't act like it. The finger can't always be pointed at them, and our problems shouldn't all be externalized. We're the ones allowing them to control us. Why? Aren't we any smarter than the Bengal tigers in that cage? Why don't we all pull together instead of letting them tear us apart and rip the controllers to shreds? There are only a few of them and millions of us. We can do it. Fear, the concept that levels and reduces us to lowly animals rather than beings who could transform this world into something great. But Pavlov realized this concept years ago. In fact, he learned that if a well-trained dog were suddenly traumatized by incredible doses of fear, everything it learned could be erased, and then replaced with an entirely new form of programming. Yes, reprogrammed right from scratch. Well, folks, guess what? We're the dogs. Pavlov is the controllers, and the 9/11 terror attacks are the traumatic events, or at least the start of them. And be certain there will be more. And yes, all the things we've learned until this point, concepts such as civil liberties and freedom of expression, are going to be erased, then replaced with a new form of programming, one that better suits them. Get ready for the New World Order and Big Brother because they're on their way. But we can derail this juggernaut if we want to. There's only one thing stopping us: fear. So I'll officially go on the record and say, like John Hancock signing his name in large, powerful letters on the Declaration of Independence, that I am not afraid. Are you?